The greatest human error, why we seek joy but create suffering, Buddhist wisdom. The question came up yesterday as to why we meditate. The answer is because we want happiness. In fact, all of our actions are for the sake of happiness, but most of our actions lead in the opposite direction, bringing us suffering and pain. We want to know why. The Buddha's answer to that question is that it's not the case that our quest for happiness is the problem. It's simply that we're going about it the wrong way. So he proposes a new way. Now, we may have read a lot of his teachings. We've learned that he teaches a lot about dispassion and letting go. There's that famous story where the monks are going to a foreign country, so they take leave of the Buddha. He tells them, "Go pay your respects to Sariputta before you go." They go pay their respects to Sariputta, and he asks them, "That country where you're going has many intelligent people. They're going to ask you, 'What does your teacher teach?' How are you going to answer them?" They respond, "Sariputta, we would like to hear your answer." So he tells them first to say, "Our teacher teaches the ending of passion and desire." Then he adds, because they're intelligent, their next question will be, "The ending of passion and desire for what?" And the answer is, the 5 aggregates. Although I would note here that this shows one of the differences between intelligent people back then and people now. You tell people now that the Buddha teaches the ending of passion and desire, and they change the channel. But suppose we were to take Sariputta seriously. We look elsewhere in the canon, and it becomes obvious that there's so much emphasis on dispassion. When the Buddha teaches his stepmother the 8 principles for deciding what is and is not Dhamma, the first principle is that if something leads to dispassion, then it's true Dhamma. If it leads to passion, it's not. And of course, the third noble truth tells us that dispassion for craving equals the end of suffering. So, we can come away with the impression that the Buddha's simply teaching us to let go. Sometimes we interpret dispassion as letting go of the quest for happiness. Just accept whatever is happening, and you'll be okay. That's the best you can do. But as I said, the Buddha said that the problem is not with the quest for happiness. It lies in how we go about it. He gives an analogy. Suppose a person is trying to get milk out of a cow, so he squeezes the cow's horn. He squeezes a little bit and doesn't get any milk. He squeezes it harder, and he still doesn't get any milk. Then he gives up and stops squeezing the horn, and he realizes it's so much more relaxing not to be squeezing the cow's horn. So he just relaxes, and he tells himself, "I don't need any milk." But that's not what the Buddha recommends. He affirms that it's all right to want milk. After all, the cow has milk to offer. The proper course of action is to find the udder, squeeze that, and you get the milk. Basically, what this means is that the path to the end of suffering is going to require right effort. You can't just relax and say, "I understand that those who are awakened are totally relaxed, so I'll relax ahead of time." The reason they're relaxed is because they've completed their work, and the Buddha actually says that the work involves passion. He recommends passion for the Dhamma, passion for learning how to develop skillful qualities, passion for abandoning unskillful qualities, passion for seclusion, passion for a goal that is totally unafflicted, and passion for a goal that doesn't involve any conflict. So we have to develop right passion, which means that we have to look back into our own mind to see how we can make our passions right. This is an important part of right effort, generating desire to abandon what's unskillful and to develop what's skillful. And the best way to generate this sort of desire is to see that our current actions are unskillful and are causing us to suffer. As the Buddha said, this means that we have to find what there is in the mind that causes us to act in unskillful ways. Only then will we be able to stop creating suffering because we've understood why we do it. Only when we understand why will we be able to stop. This is why we practice meditation. And this is why we should be passionate about doing the meditation. It helps us to understand the powerful hidden corners of our own minds. When I was staying with Ajahn Fuang, I translated some of Ajahn Lee's books into English, and we sent them to various Dhamma centers around Thailand and other parts of Asia. There was one person in Singapore who had received a copy. He sent a letter to Ajahn Fuang, describing his meditation practice, saying that whatever he was doing, he always saw things in terms of the three characteristics. When he was watching TV, when he was driving the car, he looked at things in terms of the three characteristics: inconstant, stressful, and not self. I read the letter to Ajahn Fuang, and he said, "Okay, write back to him and say, look at what's saying that things are inconstant, stressful, not self. That's the troublemaker. The problem is not with your television or the things you see while driving around. The problem is within the mind." This is one of the reasons why we practice concentration. We want to understand what's going on in the mind. We do that by getting the mind as quiet as we can, both because we learn a lot about the mind in the process of getting it to settle down, and also because once the mind has become quiet, then when there's the slightest disturbance in the mind, the slightest movement in the mind, we can see it clearly. That's where you begin to see how and when the mind lies to itself. This is a message that you hear throughout the forest tradition, which is that your mind is lying to you. Ajahn Chah once said that when you're keeping track of your mind, the first thing you learn is how much it lies to you. All the other Ajahns say similar things. So, you have to figure out, why is it lying and why do you fall for the lies? You'll find that a lot of it has to do with the fact that you're both lazy and stupid, especially when you think that you're being smart. So, you have to bring a slight skepticism to the movements of your mind. Where is my mind lying to me? One of the first lessons you learn when you're doing concentration, if you really stick with it, is that you get to a state where you say to yourself, "My mind is totally quiet." But if you stay with it longer, you begin to see that there's still a little bit of disturbance in there. So, you let go of what you're doing that's causing that disturbance, and then it gets a lot quieter. Then you say, this is it, totally quiet. But if you stay with it for a while, you find that there's a disturbance there as well. You see the level of stress in the mind go up and down very subtly, and you can detect what you're doing to make it go up and down. You're developing your sensitivity. This is why one of the emphases in the forest tradition is that you try to get the mind as quiet as possible. There's a map in the canon as to what the different stages can be. We've been working basically on the first two. The first stage of jhana is when you're focused on talking to yourself about the breath and trying to adjust it so that it feels just right for the body, just right for the mind. Basically, you're trying to get the mind and the object to fit snugly together, as when you're putting two pieces of wood together and they fit together perfectly. Then, when they settle down like that, you can stop the internal dialogue and can just be one with the breath. There will be a sense of fullness and pleasure. That's the second jhana. Now, sometimes that sense of refreshment or rapture comes to be too much. It's as if you're tuning your radio. You've been listening to heavy rock, but now you want to listen to something more calming. You find that there's a more subtle level of energy in the body, so you focus there. This gets you into the third jhana. As you continue there, you'll find that even breathing seems to be too much of an effort. The breath energy in the body is full, so you can simply stop breathing. You realize the breath energy comes from within, so you really don't have to worry about the need to pull anything in from outside. Then, as everything gets very still, you begin to realize that your sense of the body begins to lose its outline so that it's made up of little sensation points, like little droplets of water in a cloud. You can focus on the space between the spots. You realize that that space connects with the space outside of the body, and then it goes through the walls, so there's nothing that is not entirely surrounded or penetrated by space. You hold that perception of space in mind. Then you ask yourself, well, what is it that knows the space? and then you focus directly on that consciousness. Now, we're not talking about going through these stages in the course of 5 minutes. It takes a while, sometimes a long while. But with time and practice, as you get more solidly with this sense of just knowing, you begin to sense that it would be even more relaxing to just drop the perception of oneness in the knowing. That leaves you with a sense of nothing, and you stay with that perception. Now, some people find this really fascinating, figuring how you can take apart your perceptions of your body and of your mind. You learn a lot about the process of fabrication, and you can actually get very passionate about learning these stages of concentration. Other people find this very easy, so they don't find much interest in the process of getting the mind to settle down. However, they do find it interesting to figure out what happens when they leave concentration. In other words, what is it that the mind latches onto when it lets go of the concentration? How does it go back to creating more stress for itself as it engages with the world? Here you can apply the 5 steps that we've been talking about in the course of the retreat, looking for the origination of whatever you find yourself holding on to, how it passes away, how you pick it up again, what the allure is that makes you want to pick it up again. Then you look at the drawbacks of holding on to that thing, and when it hits you that the drawbacks outweigh the allure, and that you have the alternative not to hold on, you let it go. As for the people who find concentration fascinating, they eventually get to the point where they see that even that state of nothingness is fabricated and has to be maintained, so then they apply the same 5 steps to that. Basically, what it comes down to is that you get really passionate either about concentration or about discernment because of how they help you to understand and unravel the mind's unskillful habits. But you need both. It's only when you've been passionate for these 2 things that you begin to understand why the mind has been creating suffering. Then, when they've done their work, you can let them both go. So, to get to the ultimate dispassion, you have to be passionate about the path. Don't think you can just relax and glide into Nibbana. It requires understanding the activities of the mind, because you don't really understand suffering until you understand why you're doing it, why you're clinging to things. If you simply force yourself to let go for a while, it's very likely you'll pick things up again because you don't really understand the allure of clinging. As one of Ajahn Lee's students once said to him, "It's very easy to let go of this bowl, but I still have my hand on top of it, ready to pick it up again." It's when you really understand why would you want to grip it to begin with. That's when you can totally let it go. The path does require work, but as the Buddha says, you can learn how to be passionate for it. You can learn how to really like doing it. This is why his Dhamma talks are so full of encouragement and rousing and urging, helping you to realize that even though the path is a challenge, you're more than up for the challenge. In America, there was a psychologist who specialized in what's called positive psychology, which is basically the study of what makes people happy. When he interviewed people, he asked them to describe what made them happy, and then he would have them make notes when they were actually experiencing those activities to see exactly how happy they were. Most people reported that they weren't really as happy as they thought they would be. Why is it, he thought, that people are so ignorant about their happiness? Then he reflected on himself. He liked to do mountain climbing, and he noticed that before going up the mountain, he was happy about the fact that he was going to go up the mountain. When he had come down from the mountain, he was happy that he had been up there. But while he was on the mountain, he was miserable. The conclusion he came to was that people shouldn't look too carefully at the ways they find happiness. Happiness thrives in ignorance. But the Buddha would have you look at the issue in another way. Why is it that we talk ourselves into thinking that something makes us happy? There's so much embroidery that goes into anticipating happiness and then talking to ourselves about it afterwards. If our experiences really were that good, we wouldn't have to embroider them so much. We should come to the conclusion that sensory pleasures don't provide us with as much happiness as we think they do. We're ignorant of what we're doing, which is why we suffer. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha would say, "Look someplace else for happiness." The whole point of the third noble truth is that there is a much better happiness, a happiness that requires no embroidery, the happiness that comes from abandoning craving. That's why he recommends the path of virtue, concentration, and discernment. But that path too requires some elaboration, because it takes work to hold to the precepts, to get the mind to settle down and to try to figure out how the mind is deceiving itself. This is why he said we should try to develop delight in the path. Delight is basically our mental embroidery on our pleasures. The Buddha often mentions delight together with passion. We need both in order to give ourselves the energy to stick with the path even when it's difficult. And it should be something we should find easy to find delight in. You're finding out about your own mind. You're trying to figure out how it is that the mind can lie to itself and why the mind likes to be lied to. This should be one of the most fascinating things in the world. Of course, part of us doesn't like revealing this because we don't like to admit to ourselves that we've been lying and been willingly accepting our own lies. But when you can identify with the part of the mind that likes to figure things out, and you give the mind the sense of well-being that comes with the practice of concentration, so that you put yourself in a good mood to do this work, then it's easier to admit to yourself, yeah, I have been kind of foolish, but I'm foolish no more. When you get to the goal, there's no more need for passion or delight. The happiness that comes there doesn't require any elaboration. In other words, it's so happy that you don't need to elaborate, which is why they say that the awakened ones are beyond delight. To us, it sounds a little bit dry, but the actual experience is just the opposite. You don't have to keep talking to yourself about how great Nibbana is. You don't need to add herbs and spices. It's totally satisfying in and of itself. The need for a purpose. There's an interesting passage in the canon where the Buddha talks about how we fashion the aggregates. The language is kind of strange, but the point is that we want to have aggregates and we fashion them for the sake of something. It doesn't say what the sake is for, but that's how we ordinarily engage in the present moment. We have a purpose, which means, of course, that we have some expectations, that by fashioning a sense of form, feelings, perceptions, thought fabrications, and consciousness out of the raw material given to us by our past karma, we're looking for something. We have a purpose in mind. This is the nature of our mind. It's purposeful. When it has no purpose, it's miserable. This is why depression comes when people feel that no matter what efforts they make, they're accomplishing nothing. All the avenues for happiness are closed off. There's nothing they can do. That's when they get depressed. The only way out of that depression is to realize there are goals that are worthwhile. They may take a lot of effort, but long-term happiness is possible. This is why, when the Buddha defines the question that lies at the basis of discernment, it's not a question about acceptance or about oneness, or about simply being in the present moment. It's, what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term harm and pain? There's a duality there. You realize that your actions do make a difference, and long-term happiness is possible. We hear so much about inconstancy, impermanence, to the point where some people say, well, everything that happens is going to disappear right away, so why bother? Just learn how to accept and be okay with what's happening. But the Buddha never said that. Long-term happiness is possible, and it can be attained through our efforts. So, wisdom lies in giving yourself a good goal, a good for the sake of that you're going to be fabricating things for. It also gives you guidance on how to go in the right direction. This is what right view is all about. Identifying which actions are skillful and then raising your sights from just skillful thoughts, words, and deeds to actions that can actually lead to a goal that's beyond long-term, beyond ordinary welfare and happiness, something that's outside of space, outside of time, free from all limitations. That's the one thing that doesn't have a purpose. Nibbana itself doesn't have to go anywhere, doesn't involve any fabrications. There's no for the sake of anything else. Someone asked the Buddha one time, "What is virtue for?" Virtue is for the sake of developing concentration. What's concentration for? Concentration is for the sake of developing discernment. What's discernment for? For the sake of release. What's release for? For the sake of unbinding total freedom. What's unbinding for? The Buddha said, "No, stop there. Your question is going too far. When you get to Nibbana, there's no for the sake of." So, the message of the Buddha is extremely optimistic. There's a happiness that's so satisfying and so reliable that you don't have to do anything more once you've got there. But to get there requires that you do have a sense that you're doing this for a purpose. And the purpose is a good one. In some cases, the motivation focuses on the fact that you're not there yet. That's called renunciate pain. But renunciate pain has a hope. The expression in the canon is, "There are those who've attained this goal, but I'm not one of them." It recognizes the fact that there is a goal that's attainable. That's the hope. The pain is in your realization that there's work to be done. This is where you have to learn how to talk to yourself. That's why the Buddha's teachings don't only instruct you, but also urge, encourage, and rouse you. He recommends that you develop a passion for the path, foreseeing that it'll lead to something good. So, we're not just here to hang out in the present moment and think that the present moment is all the world has to offer. The present moment can be good for someone whose material and social status is comfortable. You look at Buddhist history, and there tend to be times when there are people whose view of the world is that things are fine as far as they're concerned. That's because the interconnected web of causes and effects is working pretty well for them. They're the ones who tend to glory in the present moment. But what about people whose present moment is not that glorious? Years back, I was going to be teaching at a Vipassana center in Paris. I was waiting outside my hotel for someone to come and pick me up, and I realized that since I'd come to France on that trip, there had always been someone around to translate for me. But here, there was no one. The thought went through my mind, what if somebody comes up and asks me a question? I could usually understand what people were saying in French, but I was really poor at speaking it. And sure enough, there was a group of telephone linemen across the street. One of them caught my eye and came over and said, "You're Buddhist, right?" "Yes." "Are Buddhists happy? Does Buddhism make you happy?" "Yes," he said. "I'm miserable. I've got this horrible job. I've got horrible friends I can't trust." So I was able to cobble together a sentence. I said, "Well, look at our website. We've got some teachings in French." He smiled and went back to work. The people came, picked me up, took me to the Vipassana center. The theme of my talk that night, I had already decided on, was that the present moment is not the goal. The present moment is something that's constructed. As we practice, we construct it for the sake of finding something that goes beyond the present moment. You don't just rest here, content. I started the talk by telling the story of the lineman. I commented that if I had told him simply to accept the present moment, don't have any expectations, learn how to be okay with where you are with your horrible job and horrible friends, he wouldn't have smiled. He would have just walked off. It wouldn't have met his needs. But the whole point of the Buddha's teachings is it does meet our needs. We've been living a life where we're not satisfied with the goals we've been aiming at. The Buddha gives us a better set of goals, along with instructions on how to get there and how to motivate ourselves to want to do it. As he says, you learn how to delight in the fact that there is the true Dhamma, something that points out the way and affirms that you do have the power to make a difference. You learn how to delight in abandoning unskillful qualities and in developing skillful ones. The word delight here is good to understand. It means the way you talk to yourself about what you're doing and about the goals you have. The delight is that you've found that you've got some good goals and you've got some good ways of getting there. So you talk to yourself about how good that is. to encourage yourself. Now, we tend to delight in things that are not all that satisfactory. In fact, that's the mind's way of encouraging us to keep on going in spite of disappointments. The Buddha says, though, that you can use that capacity for delight to help you on the path. For instance, you learn how to delight in solitude. When you're alone, sometimes you're feeling lonely, but you remind yourself that there are all kinds of people in the world who could be really harassing you right now, bothering you right now, and you don't have to deal with them. You've got time to look into your own mind, to develop the qualities in the mind that are going to be helpful, and to do really important work. The work of cleaning out your greed, aversion, and delusion is not a minor thing, and you're not the only one who's going to benefit. So, you learn how to tell yourself to be happy that you've got this seclusion. When the mind is beginning to settle down and part of it says, well, you're not doing much thinking right now, it's not very intelligent, learn how to talk to yourself then. Remind yourself that this is an important skill, learning how to keep the mind content as it gets quiet so that it can see itself clearly. The quiet is not an end in itself. It's something you do for the sake of discernment, but do it well, and be happy that you have the opportunity to do it. The last two things the Buddha has you delight in are the fact that this is a path that, as he says, is unafflicted and leads to the unafflicted. In other words, the path itself doesn't cause any harm to anybody, and it leads to a goal that doesn't cause any harm to anybody at all. You look at the way most people look for happiness in their lives, and it's going to cause harm one way or another. Most people learn how to turn a blind eye to that. But here, you can look at this goal in a clear-eyed way and see that it's not harming anyone. The path there doesn't harm anyone, so take delight in that. The final thing the Buddha has you delight in is what he calls non-objectification. This too is a name for the goal, one of the many names for the goal. Objectification means that once you identify yourself as a person, as a being, beings need to feed. When they feed, they tend to feed in areas where other beings are trying to feed as well. Sometimes they even feed off of those other beings, which inevitably leads to conflict. But here you're going to a goal that has none of that. No feeding, no conflict. It's a good goal to be aiming at. Now, there are times when the Buddha would say to just focus on the present moment, but he also tells you why you're focusing on the present moment. It leads to something beyond the present moment. First, it leads to results that you'll see now and on into the future, long-term welfare and happiness, and then to something even beyond that, something outside of time entirely. So, when things get dry, remind yourself that you're on a good path. It may have its fallow periods, but those are periods you can learn from. As you learn how to talk to yourself, learn how to take some delight in the fact that you found the Dhamma, and it's pointing you in a good direction. So learn how to keep yourself going in that direction. You're talking to yourself. Your practice of virtue, concentration, discernment is all for the sake of something really good. After all, the mind functions for the sake of something. Feed on the fact that you're doing something good. This will take you eventually to a goal where you don't need to do anything at all for the sake of anything. It's the ultimate happiness. It's the one thing you can do and really arrive. There's nothing more to do, and you're perfectly content that there's nothing more to do. The happiness is that complete. Your mind is lying to you. There's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin's sitting on a sled at the top of the hill and he's thinking, "Go ahead, go down the hill. You won't run into that boulder. You won't run into that stream. It's not too steep." And in the last panel, he turns and says to the reader, "My brain is trying to kill me." And that's one of the main problems in life. Your mind is trying to kill you. If not kill you physically, it's trying to kill your goodness, kill your possibility for really getting anywhere in the practice. Ajahn Mahabua talks about how when he was a young monk, he was afraid to go out and practice for fear that it would be wasted energy. There was a belief in those days that the time for jhana had passed, the time for nirvana had passed, and he was afraid any effort in that direction would be wasted. He got over the fear by realizing that whatever the Buddha taught was not meant to be an executioner of your happiness. Whatever's required of the path, whether it's easy, whether it's difficult, it's all good. And it's not that progress happens only when the path is easy or only when you're enjoying it. There's a sutta where the Buddha talks about how some things are good in the present, good in the future, good in the present, bad in the future, bad in the present, good in the future, bad in the present, and bad in the future. The one that's bad in the present but good in the future, he says, is the case where a person is practicing the Dhamma, leading the holy life, thoroughly miserable, tears running down his cheeks, but he's willing to stick with it. In cases like that, the mind has lots of ways of pulling you away, and you have to watch out for them. Learn how to catch the mind when it's lying to you. Sometimes it comes as psychotherapy, saying, forcing yourself is bad for you, you know? It's unhealthy. And all the jargon that therapists have cooked up to keep people from exerting themselves, to keep them happy with a life that really is not worth being happy with. Like the therapist I was talking to up in Vancouver last year, he was working in a storefront that offers psychological counseling to drug addicts, and he was telling me that for years they had trouble just getting people to come in off the street for free therapy. They found the one approach that worked to at least pull the people into the storefront was to help them work on their self-esteem. But the problem was that they ended up with clients who had high self-esteem but were still on drugs. They were perfectly okay now with taking drugs. They didn't feel bad about themselves for taking drugs. And the therapist was beginning to realize that this was not an advance. It was actually a setback. There's a lot of that in psychotherapy. Therapists will tell you that there are a lot of fellow therapists who are afraid they're going to lose their clients, so they tell the clients whatever they think the clients want to hear. And because psychotherapy claims to be a science, it begins to sound scientific. So we have to watch out for that. People even use the Dhamma as a way of lying to themselves, using the wrong Dhamma at the wrong time. There's a classic case of that in the 4-volume novel, Joseph and His Brothers. Joseph has been working as a slave in charge of Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife has been trying to seduce him for an entire volume of the novel, and you think he's been able to steer clear of her. But then one day the whole family goes out for a holiday that requires everybody to go over to the west side of the river for ceremonies at the tombs. When they come back home, there's going to be a big dinner. And Potiphar's wife lets it be known that she's not feeling well, so she's going to stay home alone in the house. At first, Joseph goes over with the group to the west side of the river, but then he starts telling himself, gee, as a responsible steward here, I really ought to go check the arrangements back at the house. This is followed with a long series of little maxims that he repeats to himself to convince himself that that's his duty to go back. So, as a fool, he ends up going back, and Potiphar's wife attacks him physically. He's able to get away, but she has his cloak in her hand, the evidence that he tried to rape her. It's because of that he has to go into prison, all out of a false sense of duty. So you have to watch out for the voice in the mind that says, well, you'd really be better off. You've got this duty, you've got that duty. But is it genuinely your duty? That's one of the most seductive ways the mind has of lying to itself. This is why, when you meditate, you have to learn how to say no to every thought that comes up. It's your first line of defense. That means not just putting it aside, but questioning it. Is that really true? Is that so? Is that so? You could ask. And then watch. Try to keep the mind in position with the breath, or just with the sense of the body in the present moment, staying outside of your thought worlds. And remember the old principle: don't believe everything you think, because it's very rarely that we fall for just raw desire. Desires have their reasons. This was an old problem in ancient philosophy. Plato said that reason and desire are two totally separate functions of the mind. But then the Stoics notice that, no, if you can reason with your desires or reason can win out over desires, you're not winning out through sheer force. If desires actually listen to reason, it means they have reasons of their own, and often they won't tell you what their real reasons are. They're like politicians. They wave a flag over here so they can do their dirty work over there. If you really love yourself, really care for yourself, really want to put an end to suffering, you have to learn to recognize the red herrings, the distractions, the good-seeming reasons that are actually going to lead you astray. Going to lead to? That action. What is it going to lead to? That action. What is it going to lead to? Where does it tend? If you get pulled off into abstractions, you get pulled further and further away from the actual mental act of seeing the connection between the action and the result. This is why a lot of meditation is a matter of staying under the radar. Abstractions are flying through the air, but you stay down close to the ground. Just watch. When I think in this way, what's the tone in the body? What's the tone in the mind? Where is this leading? Which of my defilements wants me to believe this? It's like that old way of protecting yourself when you're reading magazines or newspapers. Somebody wants me to believe this. Why? That way, you don't get entirely pulled in by a skewed way of thinking. This is one of the most valuable gifts of the practice. It gives you a place here with the breath where you can step back and watch your thought worlds in terms of cause and effect. This is how the Buddha himself said he got onto the path. After realizing that jhana was one of the factors of the path, he had to work on right resolve, that is, training his mind to see what kind of thoughts lead toward concentration and what kind of thoughts lead away from concentration. In the same way, you look at your thoughts in terms of cause and effect. To what extent are they bringing the mind to a sense of well-being or ease? Of course, sometimes the path to that ease is going to be hard. The Buddha never said it's going to be easy all along the way. You have to keep an eye toward the long-term results of what you're doing. So the concentration, as you're working at it, develops a set of skills that enable you to gauge what's being said in the mind, so that you can figure out who's lying to you and who's telling the truth. Who has your best interests in mind and who doesn't? Remember that image of a John Lees, of all kinds of beings, germs and whatnot, in your bloodstream. A thought goes through your brain, and maybe it's the thought of one of those little beings going through the bloodstream around your brain. Thinking in this way reminds you that you don't have to identify with everything that comes up in the mind or gets lodged in the body as an emotion. I've been reading about the Romantics and the Transcendentalists, how they really had a strong respect for the mind's intuitions and they gave them absolute authority. That's dangerous. You can't give absolute authority to anything. You have to test everything and test the way you test things. And in the testing, you try to develop the ability to judge more and more reliably. This is why we take refuge in the Buddha to begin with, because we need someone as an example. Someone with whose example we can compare our thoughts or actions or our words until we reach the point where we really can depend on ourselves. So, if anything's pulling you away from the practice, remember, it's lying to you. And it's not going to present itself simply as raw desire. It's going to have its reasons, some of which sound very smooth and convincing. One of the skills you have to develop as a meditator is to learn how to see through that. One of Ajahn Fuang's traits that really struck me when I first met him was how skeptical he was. He wasn't willing to jump to conclusions, either believing or not believing. He'd watch, and he'd watch some more, and he'd watch some more. That's how to prevent even your insights from getting hijacked by your defilements. When an insight comes in, pride can arise around it, which is why Upasaka Kinanayan always advised that whenever an insight comes, watch to see what happens next, and what happens next, and then what happens next. Ajahn Lee's test would be, if you gain an insight, ask yourself, to what extent is what you just learned true? To what extent is its opposite true? It's this ability to step back and watch that's so important, so that ultimately you can see through to the truth.